14th, 2024, Valentine's Day work session for the Board of County Commissioners, Douglas County. Commissioner Kelly will be joining us on Zoom, and the rest of us are here. We are going to have a conversation about open space. That is an ongoing conversation, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Plinsky to get us started.
I'm going to turn it over to Kim. Just a reminder to everyone, work sessions are for discussion purposes only. No decisions are made at these meetings. There is no public comment. We don't do public comment at work sessions, but you can provide public comment at the 5:30 business session immediately following. And I'll turn it over to Kim.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Kim Kreiner Ritchie. I'm the Sustainability Manager for Douglas County, and I have with me today members of our open space team, Caitlin Amerlin, Heritage and Conservation Coordinator, Tanya Voigt, Zoning and Codes Director, Leo Runke, Zoning Specialist, and online we have Christina Kacher-Webb, who is our consulting partner with Logan Simpson, who's been helping us through this process. So we're very pleased today to present a complete public draft of the Douglas County Open Space Plan. When we last came to you in October, we were presenting some draft components. And since that time, we have done a lot of refining and focusing to bring forward what we hope is a plan that is proactive, responsive to community feedback, and relevant to Douglas County. Slides, sorry. Christina will be sharing her screen. I'm sorry, that's okay. That was just an introduction. Great. Thank you, Christina, and you can advance. All right, so today we just want to give a quick recap of our planning process, then a high-level overview of the draft that you have in your packet, tell you what our next steps are, and answer your questions. So with that, I'll ask to advance, and I'll hand it over to Caitlin.
Thank you so much for having us this afternoon. We will walk through pieces of the plan and starting this session today and starting as the plan does with an acknowledgement of the original land stewards of Douglas County. This is how the plan opens, and you'll see the text up there. This was developed in collaboration with our advisory committee and hopefully acknowledges the past doings of the land and also recognizes the importance of bringing Indigenous folks into the process and uplifting the wisdom and knowledge and leadership in this space moving forward. And I will pass it then to Christina.
Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me okay, Commissioners?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So we're going to go through a quick overview of each of the chapters. So chapter 1 is the introduction. It really starts out to frame the process as we came to you in October, explaining the background on the planning process and how we got to here today. We really emphasized in this introduction that we're building on the history from Plan 2040 to the Open Space Charter in 2019 and those other values that have shaped the community coming up to this point. We really wanted to establish what is open space and why we need a plan now. And this plan is really going to set the shared vision for the community, identifying priorities for different spaces around grasslands, public parks, farmland, agricultural areas, trails, and those other types of passive recreation spaces. We really wanted to establish why we're doing this now. There is no comprehensive plan for the entire county for what even an open space program would look like. So this opportunity and this planning effort was a way to check in with the community, ask them what their input was, what areas we should focus on, and how we are going to do that moving forward. And in the faces of a lot of changes with the county, from land use changes to weather patterns, we really wanted to put all of that together in a consolidated plan. So that's the first chapter. The second chapter really focuses on community engagement. Well, we started with our contract over a year ago. We really started in earnest with the public engagement last spring when we sent out mailers and hard copy questionnaires to the entire county. And we got input throughout April through about June, when we had some public meetings and focus groups. And that was our first big kickoff to the event and to the planning process. Throughout the planning process, we've heard from a variety of different organizations and agencies, from the National Soil Conservation Service to the Forest Service, the State Forest Service, to local advocacy groups on trails and the river. So really hearing from a variety of people. And across the county, we've gone to having town hall events throughout the county and visiting different site locations for community members that are working in this space, working on farms, working in our historic resources across the county. In October, we came back and had another round of information, and we've taken that information, like Kim was saying, and really refined what we're going to present to you today and what is available right now to the public. Just as a quick overview, we've heard all of this throughout this planning process about wildlife preservation, about recreation, getting out in the community, protecting our agricultural lands and our agricultural economy, focusing on lands that escape from urbanization, such as respite from heat and natural areas, balancing different types of environmental concerns, resistance to certain types of large-scale development, and making sure that these public lands and our future open spaces are publicly accessible while preserving cultural and historic preservation. We've had a great advisory committee. We've met 7 times throughout this process. They also joined us on some of the walking tour and been really critical in reviewing our administrative drafts that we had throughout the process. You can see the list of all the folks that were involved throughout this process. And these folks definitely were very instrumental to shaping the recommendations and where we are today. Chapter 3 is a summary of the needs and existing conditions. So we took all that community value and public input and looked at baseline conditions to take both of those pieces of data and inform our eventual recommendations, which we'll talk about today. So it's important to root all of the background information and what we're hearing from the community and where we are today. What are the trends for the future for different types of resources? And I won't go into too much detail on these chapters or this section today, but you can see that we've broken out this chapter into a variety of maps and graphics and pieces of information that are important to shaping the eventual recommendations based on what we heard and why this is important to Douglas County. So we covered conserved lands, natural resources, trails, historical context, agricultural resources, climate resiliency, land use and growth, and then finally how the current county is operating and conservation efforts, and kind of comparing that to the rest of the state. The 4th chapter is a pretty meaty chapter, pretty important chapter. You saw in October our vision and the community values, and so we've these have pretty much stayed the same since October. We just refined and tweaked them throughout. The values are detailed more specifically in the plan, but here's a quick summary of what those values highlight. And so this plan will look at enhancing these vision and values. And a key piece of this vision and values is it's not just for staff necessarily, it's for anyone who is working in this space, our partners, our agencies, community members, willing landowners. Everyone can look at this plan and look at this vision and look at these values and pull out what's important to what their organization's working on. If you're specific to working in the historic spaces or if you're working on the river, we hope that this plan, and as we move forward with the conservation criteria and the next steps, as we mentioned those, that everyone can look to the vision and values throughout the county, no matter what space they're working in. And this isn't just a county document, but really a document that all folks can look at.
Okay, I'm jumping in now. Really the kind of, as Christina mentioned, the sort of meat of the plan and sort of identifying the types of spaces we want to conserve are really focused here in the conservation criteria. This takes a bit of a turn. We had presented in October a potential map of priority conservation areas, and so we've stepped back from that map and have instead focused on identifying specific characteristics of land that we would be interested in conserving. And so this really takes it to more of a site-by-site sort of basis and helps lay a broad foundation for how, different ways that land conservation could look in Douglas County. And so listed up there are the conservation criteria that we've identified. They start with different types of vegetation and characteristics of land that you might see, so native plant communities, those riparian corridors, and it also includes, our historic resources. And then moving through those, also how the land is being used is also considered. So the potential for restoration, how folks are stewarding the land currently, and then also keeping in mind the strategy of creating corridors. That's really reflected there in that proximity to existing protected lands, and that just helps ensure synergy across the conservation system. These are detailed much further in the plan. You can see up there, there's the example of the native plant communities. So they outline specific considerations for decision making. I mean, these are very broad categories, so we define them a bit more, and they can also be further defined as we think about how these will be used. So whether they're used to, help proactively allocate resources, through a potential grant program, but they could be used in other ways as well. Through the work that Tanya does and her team in the planning and development side.
And one thing just to add to the conservation criteria, I think you'll realize that you see a lot of this conservation criteria when you get applications for development. A majority of those are already identified as sensitive lands for Douglas County.
I'm also going to jump in and add to this conversation. So as our team really kind of honed in on this approach to prioritizing spaces in Douglas County, we got really excited as this started to really refine and come together. And as we kind of realized that this may be a better fit than trying to map all the priorities in Douglas County, because this criteria can be applied across the county. As opportunities and decision-making arise, we can go back to this list and go back to the criteria, and this can be applicable. Just something that we can't foresee. The future's unpredictable, and we're not delineating what our priorities are by a map. And so we're really pleased that we ended up in this direction and continued to work through some of the challenges to come to something that would be a little bit more useful for Douglas County. Also want to point out that this section includes some additional considerations on top of the conservation criteria that could play into decision-making, and those include kind of compounding considerations like public safety, partnerships and matching resources, equity and access, being able to meet multiple criteria and have multiple benefits from a particular opportunity. So just wanted to highlight that as well.
The final piece I'll add here is that just generally to throw in that it is not the intention to conserve all lands that meet one or more of these criteria. They're more of a framework that outline prime candidates potentially for future investment. But yeah, so if you were to potentially map out all these, it would be a significant portion of the county, and that's not the intention of these criteria. It's more on the site-by-site basis.
Can I ask a quick question here? How do you envision land coming forward to an open space program? And I know probably have to say that, can't say this too many times, that all of that would be voluntary, but can you talk about how land might come to this?
So we have an upcoming slide that's going to talk about all the implementation tools. Great question.
Right, as Tanya was saying, we're getting into our implementation recommendations. We are recommending a phased approach into implementation, and I think our team has a little bit, we'll all jump in with our kind of different excitement about these different phases and describe them to you, and Commissioner, get to tools and potential scenarios or priority projects where we can talk about those examples of land coming to us. Thank you.
So one of the program models for the open space plan through the Zoning and Codes Office would be the implementation of a natural resource planner in our office. The natural resource planner would ensure that our planning efforts have a natural resource lens. The focus would be on area plans, which would include, for example, the upcoming Southern Development Plan, as well as any future land use plans in the unincorporated area. And then in the more immediate day-to-day work, they would be reviewing on the natural resource side for any development applications, which would be conditional use permits, temporary business uses, rezones, all of those applications that you see regularly.
So another program model that continues to kind of build, could be an avenue for Douglas County to pursue, would be to potentially expand or use the existing natural and cultural grant program as a framework for continuing to provide resources for open space related projects. We actually have a pilot program that's accompanying our existing HCC grant program this year for open space funds, to kind of get an idea of what a potential grant program might look like. And that also, so that would be kind of a smaller way to kind of use that existing framework, or it could be built bigger, kind of jumping ahead a bit. That kind of final piece could be, that could really be scaled up over time. But again, like Kim mentioned, a phased approach. So it would definitely start small before it would reach, a large piece here. And that could be where folks reach the county through a grant program.
Would our existing Heritage Conservation Council grant funding program fall under the open space program then as this gets implemented?
I think that's still to be determined. I think it would definitely play a role in some way. It's an existing way that we do support work in this space. So it would be involved in some way, but the exact details are still, through this process, we'll figure out where that lands.
So another element of the phased approach could be the piloting of an additional staff position to lead open space efforts. After we tell you about some implementation tools, we're also going to tell you about some project areas that we think that the county can take action in the short term, and that will take capacity to coordinate. And so with some allocated American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds that we have earmarked specifically for open space launch and implementation, we are proposing that we could pilot a staff person through those funds to sort of test the efficacy of the need in this area, then add the capacity to our team, which already is working in different areas of the county, to carry forward the initial steps of this program. And next slide, Christina, please.
So here's where we get to highlighting kind of how the land would come into open space. Probably the biggest and one that sticks out to me is the creation of an open space zoning district. That would be a voluntary landowner zoning district. The county does not force rezones. Every rezone that goes before the Board of County Commissioners is a landowner-initiated rezone. It's something that the landowner is requesting and asking for. So the open space zoning district would be a district that when we're speaking with partners, with landowners, willing landowners, and just working through identified areas that we've identified as priority areas, that they would be able to rezone to that district. We haven't created a district, we haven't worked out a rough draft, so we're not sure what all land uses would be permitted in those districts, but it would be with the intention of long-term protection of that land. That would be one of the biggest ones. We also have had quite a bit of conversation about a future land use map. We've kind of stepped back from just looking at mapping, but do understand that when priority areas are identified, it would be worth doing a study and mapping those areas so that you can see the relevance of what the future uses, what you would ideally like to see the future uses in those areas to be. Want to add anything?
I was just going to say, I think it's important to identify that that would be a public process. The public would be involved as that developed, if that was a route that we chose. Just wanted to mention that.
Next slide. Okay, so I have mentioned that as we've refined the plan, there kind of came to the surface 3 main areas where we thought that, where we want to recommend that the county can take some initial action. And these areas really rose to the top from not only what we heard from the values, from the community, what we heard from you commissioners, and also looking at that conservation criteria and looking at the intersections of those priorities for the county. So the first area is to examine our existing county conserved areas. So the county manages 2 public spaces, Lone Star Lake and Wells Overlook. So some of what we heard talking to the community was, well, what even is out there? What spaces can I go to? And is everyone aware of that? And are we looking at them and taking the best care we can of those? So, that we heard that and that really resonated. So looking at our own spaces, examining our stewardship plans, looking at restoration opportunities, if there are enhanced facilities or enhanced access opportunities to help the community access those more, and then the educational opportunities that might be possible through volunteering or internships. But again, that would all take coordination and leadership, and so we're seeing that in as a potential kind of test of an open space role.
So the second main project that kind of rose to the surface through this process would be programmatic support for private land conservation. So we really heard and learning what the county can do is really not taking on a lot of land. It's really not the county's role to acquire all the land. Even if it was donated or through donations, we don't have the capacity to steward that properly as it is. But one way that we can facilitate that conservation is through helping folks access permanent private land conservation. Again, would be all through willing landowners, and the details of that can be worked through, but really would center around working with community partners to help facilitate potentially conservation easements and help offset some of those costs that are associated with that. That's often the biggest burden to folks who are interested in those conservation values and permanently protecting their land. The costs associated with that are often extremely high. So finding a way that the county can help offset those costs either through a potential grant program or working directly with potentially the Kansas Land Trust and other land trusts that work in Douglas County to reduce the administrative burden that comes with those conservation easements as well. So that's a way, some ideas of how we can kind of get rolling in that direction, but really elevating, the stewardship that's already going on in the county and how we can facilitate that into the future.
And the third priority that the plan identifies based on a lot of public feedback, is the conservation of the Wakarusa River corridor. One of the reasons, other than public feedback, would be when you look at your conservation criteria, the Wakarusa corridor meets all of them. So you get all of those co-benefits, close to the city limits, also very easily accessible to rural landowners as well, also in an ideal location to bring in people from other areas as well. So we listened, we heard a lot about the Wakarusa River corridor over and over again. So some of the future steps that we would need to move forward to even identify what that means would be doing a study of the corridor and coming up with an action plan of what lands that is. Is it just the floodplain areas? Does it extend beyond that? Just kind of trying to get some ideas on boundaries. Also working with the landowners in those areas. Luckily, they're pretty large pieces of land. It's not a really high, dense number of landowners. So we would, we have this really amazing opportunity to work one-on-one with those landowners and just have conversations and see if there's an interest. We would also be very interested in identifying future grants. We do realize in partnership with we have met often with the city of Lawrence and the city of Eudora, city of Baldwin, Lecompton, but this is such a big project and big area. It's going to take a lot of collaboration that just the county can't do by itself. It's going to take a lot of partners.
If I could add on to that, I think in addition to just conversation about conservation, I think there's cultural issues associated with the Wakarusa corridor. There's hydrology issues. We've got infrastructure issues. We've got some bridges that are in rough shape over the Wakarusa. So, it's really multidisciplinary too in its approach. Do we need that bridge? Do we not need that bridge? So I want us to keep our lens as wide as we can about this. And even if we were to start that work, ask others, what should the study look like? We just know that it meets a lot of our criteria. It is something we talk a lot about. It is something that needs further review, analysis, and depth on, but I don't want people walking away from it that we have a really tight lens on what it is exactly that this would mean. I think this is a way to slightly narrow our focus into a particular geographic region that frankly, stretches the county from east to west.
Okay, I think back to you, Christina, to tell us what's next.
Sounds great. Thank you. Okay, so right now the full draft that was provided in your packet, it's been available since the end of January, and it will be available for the next week and a half or so until February 25th. It's up on this website called Conveo, which is an online commenting tool that we're using, and folks can go on there and provide their comments, scroll through the document, place a dot, kind of like you're commenting on a PDF, but on a virtual platform, and you can see other people's comments as well. There's been website updates, social media, newspaper and e-blast, newspaper releases and e-blast gone out, and will continue to go out as we have the next couple days of commenting left. We're having a hybrid public meeting next Monday. The in-person meeting part will be at the Zoning and Codes office, and then we're asking folks to register on Zoom, so that's provided in the notifications. We'll start with a presentation, so everyone that's either in person or virtual will hear an overview, kind of similar to this presentation of what's in the plan and how to comment. And then we'll break out into an in-person open house style format. So we'll have a couple boards around the room. Folks can get up and talk to people or provide their comments. And then for those people that are on virtual, we'll have like a breakout group so we can have smaller group conversations, kind of similar if we were in person. So we'll do that virtual for the people that aren't able to make it in person. And then, yeah, after that, we'll take all the comments that we get including any other discussion today. And we'll address public comments. And then we'll have our final Open Space Advisory Committee, where we'll be asking them for their recommendation. And they've seen this draft, and they have an opportunity to give their final comments during this public comment period as well. So we'll incorporate their comments and ask for their recommendation. And then in about, that will be like kind of late Marchish, and then April tentatively we'll come back to the commission for your consideration of the adoption, and we'll present all the public feedback that we got and how we addressed it in the final plan.
I just have one quick follow-up for those who are listening and wanting to find the draft online and prefer a PDF. We do have a PDF on our website as well, and our website is douglascountyks.org/open space. And you can find the Conveo version there where you can comment directly on, or the old-fashioned PDF if that's what you want. All right. Thanks.
I think we'd bring this to the commission. Commissioner Kelly or Commissioner Reed, do you have any initial questions for staff?
I have a quick question, and just looking at the membership of the advisory board, and I don't want to assume that some people haven't weighed in who maybe need to weigh in. Last week we had a discussion around Boston Crossing, and so I'd be interested to hear from those involved in the public outreach process how much they heard from development, those who may be in that space. I hate to throw out which group that is, but something like Lawrence Home Builders Association. Did you hear from them? Is that a group that we've reached out to, or similar like groups? Has that been done?
Great question, Patrick. I don't recall that we've actually reached out to the Lawrence Home Builders Association. We have had contractors come in and sit down with us. We have had some home builders and developers at our open space meetings as well, the public meetings. So I think word is traveling. I think those that are wanting to make comment or understand a little bit more are reaching out, but the Home Builders Association was not specifically identified as a group to reach out to. I would be happy to do that.
That's good. I just want to make sure that we're, that we're thinking about a diverse set of voices around a plan, and not assuming that a plan developed. And then, though the outreach has been really great, I really appreciate that. But in some ways, it's a little leaning passive, right? Hoping people show up, hoping people engage. And is there opportunities? I think like the EDC, the Economic Development Corp, might want to take a look at it as well, just because I think I at least was sort of surprised by the development plan we got last week, and because I thought we had some agreements around open space and floodplain, but I think it would be a good discussion to continue to have.
So I did notice on your on our website about open space that the 2007 Eco Squared study was included there, and I was glad to see that. It predates most of us at the table, so I was roughly aware of it, but it was good to read through the whole thing, and it was a framework that ultimately didn't move forward because of 2008, and there was not an appetite for funding at that time. It's my understanding. Feel free to jump in, but it was a fully collaborative conversation between economic development and ecology as the two values, saying that they kind of support each other. Are there threads of that, elements of that we are picking up already, or that we could be picking up?
I think there are representatives on the steering committee that were involved in those efforts back in the day. So they've been informing that process as advisors to the Open Space Steering Committee process. I'd say that, I think that was the second part of your question. The first part of your question was more about, I mean, it did, yeah, I would say it partially didn't get as much life as it was having there for a period of time. I would say because of the economic downturn in 2008 through 2010. So, and then after that point, it just wasn't, I think there was an effort of how do we start from this phase, but you know, there is state legislation available that would allow us to put something on the ballot if that's what the community chose.
Commissioner Kelly, did you have any follow-up on that? Okay.
No.
I was going to ask, I was going to ask about what fund, just to review, I think we're somewhat aware, but for the public also, what funding mechanisms have been used to cover the costs of the developing the plan, and then what funding is available for beginning the plan? You touched on it, Kim.
Yeah, we have $2 million set aside in our ARPA funds for this plan, and that was used, this has been used to pay for the study to date. And there's quite a bit of funds still available in that program. But I would say, you know, we've done some pretty creative things. You know, Tanya's team's applied to FEMA for grants for flood buyouts. You know, if there are lands that have been, or properties that have been flooded so many times, and FEMA has helped us fund those. People are putting their properties into conservation easements without any public dollars today and continue to do so. The city buys parkland for future park growth and space. So, you know, there's a variety of different ways that open space stays open.
And also to add, the Sustainability Office did apply for a different grant that we were awarded actually applied in 2019 to kick off this process. And then our funders, Partners for Places with Sustainability Directors Network, was gracious to let us hang on to the funds for a few years through COVID so that we could plan with the community engagement in mind. But yeah, just the thinking ahead and pooling together resources to get this done.
I was just gonna say, I think that what stood out to me about reading this draft plan and the changes that that your team worked on and evolved in that draft in the recent months, it was clear to me that there's some of that work already happening, whether it's just sort of like some recent testing of the waters, looking for those federal funds that we can draw down for FEMA floodplain buyouts, just looking for resources that are available to us that staff have knowledge of, that community members have been aware of and come to county staff and asked about or gotten support with through conservation easements. There's a lot of tangible examples of open space planning that's been happening sort of at random or in a circumstantial or sort of opportunistic way. So I think that really stood out to me. And I hope that stands out to folks in the public who are interested in read through this, that there's some tangible examples of what this looks like, including the county parks we have and how through this process, it became evident to some staff and those of us who are so in love with our county that we just like sort of know every little nook and cranny of it, especially staff who are out driving those roads all the time for various reasons. Assuming people know about these resources in our community, they're available and open to the public, but they may not. And so what do we do about that? And so I thought it really, there's a lot to build on. Like there's some good foundation, and it really also stood out to me that it seemed to take an approach of thinking about how to empower our residents with information, options, and resources that are relevant to whatever it is that their goals might be, right? Whether that's private conservation and for their own family and generation, or public access or donation or just participation in efforts to do restoration work in the future. I just think there's lots of opportunities, which it stood out to me a lot more than sort of the initial draft. And I think I just want to credit you all with, I think it's a very responsive document. I think that it is responsive to what you heard from community members throughout that engagement phase, and that you were nimble and flexible enough to change it along the way and to articulate it differently and to think about it maybe from a broader perspective while still not losing sight of all these nuanced examples. So I just want to compliment you all for that, because it really stood out to me. And I know our Douglas County staff members are really good at community engagement, in my opinion, and really good at being responsive. And I think that's reflected in this. And I'm excited to see what folks' continued reaction to it is, because, you know, and I appreciate the articulation, I can't remember who said it at this point, but that it's the recognition that the county is not in the business of acquiring and managing land, right? There may be some opportunities that come our way that make sense, that are reasonable within our means, and that are exciting opportunities for our community. And I think we should remain open to those, but that's not what the headliner of this open space plan or the point of it is. It's about how do we define it? What are all the different definitions and versions of it? And how do we act as a conduit for residents to resources and for resources to residents when they have an interest in whatever version of open space is of interest to them or to a community at large. So that was really evident to me in reading the document. And so thanks for being thoughtful and intentional about that and figuring out how to walk that tightrope of taking a really broad, wide lens, as Sarah was talking about, even with just the Wakarusa corridor, right? A really focused area and a focused set of possibilities and goals that we need to look at broadly in an interconnected way, but we can't lose sight of all the details in there too. So I think that you guys struck a good balance with that.
While you were talking about that, it had me thinking about another group, you know, that we mentioned earlier, but that, you know, really the Heritage and Conservation Council, really a lot of the work that they have been doing for the last decade has led up to this next evolutionary step. The work in terms of cultural surveys and also conservation projects that have been funded through the biosurvey and other things. So this really does feel like the next natural evolution was to have a plan to pull all these pieces together, but it is not, and I appreciate you reiterating that. This is not a blank checkbook to go out and buy land. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, like we do with a planning document, what is our vision? Where are we headed? What do we see? How are all of these different factors brought in?
Yeah, I like that idea of this is the next iteration of work we've already been in on for quite some time. And it's been, everybody works very collaboratively together in the county among our offices, which is fabulous and probably pretty rare. But each has had a piece of it without anyone being kind of in charge of pulling that together. So I'm just thinking about, you know, Public Works is in charge of maintaining the public lands that we do have. I'm going to add Chicken Creek Bridge on there also. But to pull that in for the next iteration of like, what's the next step ecologically? Like, how do we empower our county agencies to also have that information available? So not just empowering residents with information, but also ourselves and having kind of a focus point for that.
I think there's a couple of different ways, and some of it, you know, in my conversations with Chad and Public Works has been not only, you know, work around Lone Star Lake, work that's happening to keep that lake healthy and usable. It is also a historic resource. I mean, it is on the National Register of Historic Places, but it's also where people live, you know, on the cabin arm. So how does it meet its different audiences? How do we keep the lake healthy? It is also used for I mean, it is a, you know, I'm not going to get I mean, but like that's where water runs into through, you know, is it, I don't want to call it a drainage catchment area. Thanks, Leo. And, you know, so I'd say there's some things there in terms of Public Works, in terms of, but also the infrastructure. I mean, in our CIP plan are some bridges over the Wakarusa. You know, what is that going towards? Is it needed? Bridges over certain rivers or can be hard, and this is again, areas where I'm out of my depth as a non-engineer, but they can be destabilizing for riverbeds, I think. And so, and the Rockarusa is particularly deep and narrow, and so that's one of those considerations. Do we want to do some of those things? Is that's what's best? How many people use it, access it? So, I mean, those are just two off the top of my head in terms of public works that I could see becoming really engaged in this work moving forward. Is that kind of what you were looking for, or like opportunities?
Yeah, so I know we've had the broad lens, but the lens has been
Right.
so broad, it's been hard
Agreed.
to know how to talk about open space.
Right.
Like, how do I explain this to the public? Or how do we interest the public in something that they would want to invest in? So I think having, first of all, knowing that we have these pieces that have been in the works that are pulling together to be an open space plan, that it's not just work that starts from here and moves forward with new funding, et cetera, but having an area to focus on, having kind of a priority to say, we value the Wakarusa River Valley, we have conversations that have yet to be had to figure out what that would look like. But I think that will help the community tie all these pieces together and decide if that is something that they want to really put their heart and soul into. And you're right, it does check so many of the boxes for what this plan cares about.
I don't know that this is so much a question, but I just want to underline something in the plan and share my appreciation for it. And that's on it's page 54 of the plan, 84 of our packet. I think sometimes we have a tendency to look at community plans like this, whether it's the comprehensive plan or an area plan, and say this is the end all and be all. I read this one line in here that says this one thing, and that's where I'm making my statement about my aspiration for the land. And so this statement, and it seems a little new on that it is not realistic to conserve all lands that meet one or more of the criteria outlined in this plan, I thought was a really nice way of saying these are criteria, but it is not, I want to encourage the public not to choose this one law, this one criteria and say, now we need to preserve that because it was in the open space plan. It is for consideration. And I think it helps us as elected leaders and sort of determining the more of those criteria it hits, the more I think it leans towards doing all we can to protect that space. Am I understanding the purpose of that statement correctly?
Yeah, I think that's the exact intention of that that line in particular, because it's easy to like see these listed and think, thinking about historic structures. I've worked in that space a bit. Just because it has an older barn on it, thinking about the whole property and having that be one piece of the puzzle. So yeah, I think it's definitely thinking about it collectively and on like a decision by decision basis.
This Commissioner Reed, I will say that line struck me the same way, Commissioner Kelly. So yeah, it was well articulated with reality check, I think.
One of the things I've looked for in this plan, and I think we were getting there, or we have gotten there, that I struggled with in the most recent version before this, is that we care about everything. Like someone in Douglas County cares about every square inch of it, and that is right and proper, but not everything rises to the level of taxpayer dollars ought to be used for preservation of that. So giving us decision-making tools is exactly what I want out of this plan. Knowing what to prioritize also means giving us permission to accept change when change needs to happen. So we cannot stay the same, we cannot stay the same size. we need to be empowered as decision makers and elected officials to be able to know when to say yes to projects that come forward, even though there may be a loss and a mourning of something that is very valuable to someone, or even many someone's. But if we can say, as a community, this is the checklist, we have places that we've identified that meet more of these, that we are going to put our resources towards, that's very helpful to me.
Agreed. And I think I really appreciated the sort of three opportunities that are right in front of us to, I think, keep leading on and to really get more specific about. Definitely the Wakarusa corridor for all the reasons. We can have a whole meeting about that. I'm sure we will have many future discussions around different issues to contemplate and address there. But you know, just how to enhance public accessibility and knowledge about and you know, any restoration work that might need to be done, just the like being able to enhance the management of our county parks right now, that I appreciate. That's just sort of the phrase that people love, low hanging fruit, right? Something that is right there in front of us that I think there's already been some examples of. I mean, you know, we had goats doing some weed management for us this year as one little alternative new step. And so I think those things will be really interesting. I want to highlight them as we are developing them. And the decision-making tools, I think, you know, well, it'll look like different things for different parts of this as we talk about kind of the different versions of open space there might be and what kind of criteria weigh in here or there. But I think, like, I will be interested to see how the HCC's grant process, this pilot pool of funding around open space projects in particular, and the matrix that you all have that has recently been updated for the HCC to use in reviewing that, and then funnel that information to us as a commission for consideration. I think that will be a really good conversation for us to parse some of this out moving forward. And I just, you know, the Wakarusa corridor is such an opportunity to be hyper-focused on an area that has a lot of opportunities and a lot of considerations. And to Sarah's point, that is actually pretty large, you know, from east to west or west to east, whichever the river flows west to east. And so, and you know, I just also want to highlight it's written in the plan, and it's been acknowledged here a little bit, but that for me personally, anyway, a large part of the importance of that space is the cultural importance and value that it has to this community, and how to preserve that in addition to the ecological considerations and the infrastructure considerations and recreation considerations that I mean, there's undeniably been irreparable harm done to that area, in part by decisions made by our governing body and other governing bodies over time. And so there is harm to repair there. So I just want to lift that up and say that for me, that's a central part of why that focus area is so important. And then it also just has all these other criteria that has been articulated in this plan for us to really see what tangibly it can look like to apply these values and decision-making lenses or rubrics, or however we sort of think through that, to potential projects or opportunities for land purchase or conservation or whatever that might look like. I think it's sort of a good testing ground, for lack of a better word, to really try out a few of these different tools that I think have been sort of optioned as possibilities for us to consider in one concentrated and very important area for our community.
I know we're wrapping up, but I just want to maybe double down or add my voice to my colleagues, you know, and that I really appreciate the discussion about the Wakarusa corridor. And I think it provides tremendous potential for us as a community to think about preserving the natural, the cultural, and possibly creating some public amenity in that space in the long term. So it, I think we heard mention of some sort of possible look at studying what to do there, how to do that, and I'm supportive of that. But it really, to my first question, it has to be a broad conversation with a lot of stakeholders so that we're not then surprised when someone says, "Oh, wait a minute, that wasn't what I wanted." And of course, that's going to happen. Let's be serious. But I think my intention is to really get some folks engaged that are also thinking about those developmental pressures that seem to be happening in that space as well.
At what point will there come to us some decisions to be made about possibly, staff positions to pull these ideas together, or, funding for study for the Walker River Valley? In our next steps in the presentation, it just kind of has like how we get through the next public process and to a vote by this body. But after that, what happens?
So this team will be working very rapidly after adoption to try to get some of those initial steps off the ground. The ARPA funding that we have earmarked to help us launch, do proof of concept, implement initial actions, we have to have that allocated this year. So we'll be working very, very quickly and efficiently to keep you updated really soon.
I would like to just hold out that the state house is currently considering whether the state of Kansas should set up a conservation fund. All the states around us have that. They pull down a federal match of dollars. I'm really in favor that the state keep looking at that. It's House Bill 2541, because that would also help us to have some matching work to do here, in addition to grants and such that are a lot of work to get, but we could use some help from the state and federal, especially because as a state, we're just leaving money on the table. Do any commissioners have any wrap-up thoughts? Thank you for the incredible work that has gone into this, and a huge public engagement piece that's unprecedented. Say this body of folks is really teaching us how to do that. So I know we will never catch everyone, and that is always the name of the game. But I think we can probably do another step of outreach to our development community, because I think we'll need them on board for this, and I think that they have benefits out of it also. But I just really want to commend the work that's done, and I'm really happy with the plan. So thank you. I hope you get a really good turnout on Monday at the public meeting. Any other final thoughts? With that, thank you for being here, and this has been a work session. We will take public comment at the beginning of our regular work session. This is our study session. Our regular meeting will have public comment at 5:30. If anyone would like to join us. Thank you for being here.